Thanks McGraw-Hill for having me, and thanks you everyone for being out or online. Before I start, if you can type in the questions, I just want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. If not, I can moderate my voice. I can speak a little louder if I need to. So Doug was saying the title of the talk is Using Digital Technologies to Increase Student Engagement. The way I came to this title and this work is through two different areas that kind of backed into each other over the course of my career that meant a lot to me. One, as a teacher and as someone who's worked with young people for over 20 years, I was very interested and concerned about what I saw with the lack of student engagement in a lot of my classes and a lot of the classes where I saw students. The second interest that I've had over these last 20 years is the changing nature of what it means to be literate, what it means to communicate as we enter the digital age, and things that were impossible to me when I was a kid 20, 30 years ago are now very possible for young people because of the digital technology. So I began to think about how young people's interest in and connection to digital technologies might increase student engagement. And I've always felt that this issue of student engagement is one of the most important issues in education today. I often say in my talks that I don't think we have an achievement problem in American education as much as we have an engagement problem. We have young people who show to us all the time the skills and talents that they have, and the question is, how do we develop those skills and talents, and how do we transfer them from the things that they're doing outside of class that they're really excited about into class? So that's the idea of the talk, and I'll share a little bit of background about why I think this is important, as well as some ways that we've been connecting digital technologies to this idea of student engagement. I'll share examples across the K-12 spectrum, and I'll share examples across disciplines. So if we think about why this is important, why this is necessary to do, I'm trying to move my slide to the next slide, sorry. Okay, there we go. This slide is a picture of a factory about 100 years ago, and this is an important picture because it's an image that looks a lot like the American classroom, and that's intentional because we have, you know, not a long track record of having public education in the United States or in the world. And when we finally got our public education system, it was during this era when this is what it meant to be in the world of work. As a matter of fact, the reason we needed public schools was because we needed to prepare people for the world of work. And this made a lot of sense in 1912 when this image was shot. And so we have this connection of what classrooms looked like in 1912, or this one is a little bit later, and what the world of work looked like. And that worked for us. We transitioned in a period of 100 years from being an agrarian economy and society into being an industrial economy. So I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but when we understand that the schools that we have are built on a model that was for the 20th century, we need to think about how our world is changing, and particularly, I would argue, how digital technologies are changing the way we interact in the world. And if the classroom is supposed to look like or prepare people for the world that we have and the world that is to come, we need to think differently about what we do in the classroom. So you see these images on this slide, and this is kind of what life and work looks like today. And you see various ways that it's different than those two slides I showed previous. One, you have people in more collaborative positions. You have technology. My students like to say, my high school students, they're happy, they're excited, they're engaged. And so this is what the world looks like today. Who knows what it's going to look like in 2050, but we know we're not going to go back to the women in the sewing factory or the kids with their head down in class. So we need to ask ourselves some key questions as we think about how do we prepare young people not only to inhabit, but to invent and reinvent the digital age. So my work has really been guided by a few questions that I've asked in my own classrooms and the classrooms and schools where I work as we begin to think about what it might mean to reinvent education in the digital age. This first question is the question I ask that we should be asking instead of the achievement question. And that question is, how do we get students excited about learning? If we could harness some of the excitement that you see this young girl in this picture here, I argue we'd have a very different kind of educational experience for many kids. And in the schools and the classrooms I've seen that are turning around, you know, in a year or in a couple of years, you know that the turnaround isn't because the students have different brains or different homes or different families or different socioeconomic status. What's happening in classrooms and in schools and with individual children, when you see that turnaround, is they're getting excited, they're getting engaged. And so I think that's a really important question to ask, and I think that digital technologies is one of the ways that I've seen that we can get students really excited about learning. The second question, how do we develop academic self-identity, is also important, and this gets back to something I was saying a little bit earlier about one of the key problems I see us having in school is not so much the achievement problem, but the engagement problem, and part of the engagement problem is an identity problem, that we don't have students who don't understand that it's important to have an education. Most students understand that, and we survey students all the time, and they all say generally we understand it's important to get an education, but what they don't necessarily understand is that they are important, and that's a real issue. So if you have a student that understands that it's important to get an education, but they just don't think that an education is something that they're capable of receiving because of something that's wrong with them, then we have a real problem. So I think that one of the things we need to ask is, how do we develop that academic self-identity or that academic self-confidence in students? How do we help them to feel good about being in school, to feel good about themselves as being literate? And we'll see a big difference, I argue, and I've seen it in how students achieve. This third question, related to the first two, again, my slides are a little bit slow, sorry. How do we keep education socially, culturally, and technologically relevant? And these three are really important to me for all of these reasons, for the connection to academic self-identity, for the connection to excitement and engagement, but just so that kids understand that the education they're receiving is something that is important to them across these domains, that it should be socially relevant, it should be connected to them as people who exist in the world. It should be culturally relevant and take into consideration how they learn, their families, their histories, the languages they speak, their geography where they live. But this third one is equally important to me. It's becoming more and more important, and that is, how is education technologically relevant? If you look at education over its 2,000, 3,000 year history in the West, you see that education's always been connected in some way to the latest technology, and that education is partly about helping people to have a connection to the technologies that manifest power in their society. So as technology is changing drastically in our society over the past 20, 30 years, then we have to think our schools should be reflecting some of that change, and schools need to remain technologically relevant. So some ideas about how technology can help us think differently about teaching before I get into a few examples. One of the things I argue that technology does for us is it allows us to be able to cultivate student voices in different ways. You know, I've been out of high school for over 25 years now, and I think of all the ways it was possible for me to communicate, and they were very limited. You know, I could speak in person to friends, I could maybe write a letter to a few friends, maybe I could get a photocopy machine and photocopy something that I wanted, you know, a couple dozen people or maybe, you know, 100 people to see. But these kids today have a technological capability of speaking to thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people through their social media outlets, through venues like YouTube or Facebook or Twitter. And so it's a different culture of production, and I think that that's powerful in a sense because young people can understand, even as elementary, middle, secondary students, that, you know, I have the power to share my thoughts and feelings and to connect with people. So I think this idea of teaching changes in the 21st century from really just helping people be receivers of knowledge to preparing people to be producers of knowledge. And that switch from being a receiver of knowledge to a producer of knowledge means that we have to think differently about how we engage with students. So this idea of cultivating student voices, the things that they want to say, the things they want to share, how to help them be able to say it better. I mean, that's what I call the digital literacy. The identity question is important that I asked prior. How can they feel good about their ability to say it? How can they say it with power and authority? And how can they use that to help themselves feel better about themselves? And how can they also use their voice to impact things that matter to them? So that's kind of this idea of cultivating youth voices in the digital age. Technology, I think, also impacts learning. You see this image here. about students around a computer, very similar to some of the other images that I showed before about how the world is changing. And so I think the technology is also impacting the way that that young people are learning, and I think we need to think differently about how young people are learning in this age. One of the things I think that is important is that in the digital age, learning is about participation. Learning is about doing things yourself and playing with the tool. And I think this becomes important in how we think about learning in the classroom. I think of learning in the largest sense as becoming. What do you get to do? Who do you get to become as a result of your learning? And that's a more active and proactive. I love this image. It's not an image that's related to technology per se, but it is an image about young people doing things. And I think that that's part of what technology makes possible, and I think it changes the learning environment. What we know about technology and engagement is also important. I'll just jump through this real quick so I can get to some examples. This is a theory that really impacted me as a teacher when I first started, and has impacted me as a researcher for the past 20 years that I've been doing this work. And it's called the theory of the expectancy value theory of motivation, or achievement motivation. And it basically says that motivation is a function of two characteristics. If these two characteristics are met, people are going to be motivated to achieve. If they're not, they won't. The first one is the expectation of success, right? I call it confidence. If you have confidence in your ability to do something, you'll be motivated to achieve. And when I look at young people and their interactions with digital technologies, and there's a swagger they have, there's a confidence, there's an expectation that even if I don't get it now, I'm going to get it. And that really helps them to remain motivated. If you don't have that feeling like you're going to succeed or you can't succeed, it's hard to be motivated. And I think that's what happens in a lot of our classrooms. We have children who don't think that they can succeed. And according to this theory and a lot of research that supports this theory, as long as that child feels that she cannot succeed, she's not going to be motivated. The second characteristic of this theory is value, or what I call relevance. To the degree that the task has value, you are going to be motivated to perform it. And there's so much value for our young people that's invested in their connection to the media age. And I have example after example how kids will do things that are very complicated and even time-consuming because it's so valuable to them to be a part of it. For instance, like making digital films or creating their own websites or podcasts or all sorts of other ways that the young people are connected to technology. It's valuable to them. So you put these two together, and the equation is very simple. You increase young people's expectation of success. You increase the value of what you're asking them to do. You're going to increase motivation to achieve. So we take all this as a backdrop. Getting kids excited, increasing their self-confidence, making education socially, culturally, and technologically relevant, cultivating their voices, having them learn as they participate, and creating learning environments in our classroom where there's an expectation of success and there's a confidence. And now we can move forward and think about what does this look like in our classrooms? What does this look like in a literacy classroom, science classroom, math classroom? How are we going to use these digital technologies to increase student engagement? So the first few examples I'll share are actually from the arts and humanities, English language arts, social studies, etc. One of the things that we've begun to do in a lot of classes is connect film study to our literacy units. This is an example of from a high school of a book that we would partner with a movie. Their Eyes Are Watching God is a book that we often teach at the high schools where I work, and just connecting students' literacy with film and their understanding of narrative and character development and plot, and using that as a way to connect to novels and plays has been a very productive space for us. Another thing that we are doing is connecting young people's interest in video games to the reading of literature in these classes. And this is an example I'll talk about just for a minute because it was a really powerful one from a student of mine who works with kids in Brooklyn, in New York. And he has a lot of kids who play video games, and he himself is someone who plays video games, and he's also an English teacher. And he wanted the students in his class to understand literary theory or become connected to literary theory. And we were reading literary theories in our class here at Columbia, and he wanted to share some of those with his students. And he thought a good way to connect the students to literary theory and literary analysis was to have them analyze video games as a narrative, as a text, the same way they would analyze a poem or a play or a novel. So he used African-American literary theory and other literary lenses to investigate this video game, which is Resident Evil 5, and it has some plot lines that are similar to Heart of Darkness, or you see King Solomon's Mines here on the slide, and it's basically takes place in Africa, and there are African zombies that are being killed as part of the video game. So the teacher engaged the students in a literary analysis of this narrative and its attitudes around gender and around culture, but at the same time, he also had the students looking at these similar issues inside of a novel text. So they're using their connection to video games to learn about literary theory, and they're using that knowledge of literary theory then back on a traditional text like a novel. And so the unit, which is really looking at these notions of kind of imperialism and colonization, connects a video game, it connects a traditional piece of literature like a novel, it also connects literary theory. This is another example, and we've done this across middle school and high school, where we're having students using their mobile media in class. And I have Google Antero Garcia. He's a former student of mine who's out in Colorado, who's done amazing work with cell phones in class, or mobile media devices, he's calling them, and increasing students' achievement, increasing their literacy, their connection to technology. One of the things that Antero concedes is in many schools, the most powerful computer in the room is shut off. It's the cell phone. The cell phones or the mobile media devices are more powerful than most of the computers. So the students are doing all sorts of things, from communicating on social media. He had them using the camera options to timestamp pictures. They did environmental research. They wrote. They looked up vocabulary words. He chronicled for his dissertation when he was a high school teacher in Los Angeles all the ways that students were using their mobile media devices very powerfully. This is a movement that I think is going to happen. This idea of BYOD, I don't know if people have heard of that, bring your own device, or the one-to-one, that in order to really have meaningful interaction with technology in the classrooms, we need to have more devices, but schools can't necessarily afford the devices, or can't necessarily keep up with the changing technologies. But at the same time, we know many of our students, and Carol's research was done in a pretty impoverished school, and well over 90% of the students had access to these devices, and we're seeing those kinds of numbers across the country, that maybe we should allow students to be using these devices. We can figure out ways to monitor and control that, and I'd be happy to answer questions later on about ways to do that. But the idea that there are these powerful devices in the hands of our students that are being underutilized in school, I think, is becoming more and more of an acknowledgement, and we're taking some steps to figure out how we may begin to use these devices in the classroom. Writing in the arts and the digital age. Here you see, these are students in a film school. We're having students write plays. We're having students film screenplays. This is work that we've done in elementary school all the way up through high school and beyond. Students' fascination with film, this visual medium that's really connected to a traditional written medium, it has been a very powerful way for our students to share their voices. And I argue that plays are such an underutilized genre inside of classes, both the reading of plays and the writing of plays. And I started out in my writing career as a playwright, and so I brought this to my teaching, and I saw the way it really fascinated my students. So we've been having students write their own screenplays and film them, have students do background research and create digital documentary, and we've been finding in some of the work that I've done that not only does this increase their digital literacy, but it also increases their traditional academic literacy. The kids become better readers and writers in the traditional sense when they are making these films and they're shooting these either fictional drama type films or non-fictional documentary type films. This is a picture. I didn't use a picture from my students, but I have similar pictures of students engaged in playwriting, and it is, like I said, a really powerful medium. This is something that people don't expect to see when you're thinking about traditional literacy. But we've been looking at the technology high schools, and I think that P-Tech High is one that you probably heard of here in New York City that has gotten a lot of attention from the president and others. But this idea of having technology high schools where students are using technology not just in computer programming sense, but they're also using technologies as artists. And what would it mean to have a recording studio? One of my students looked at the high school recording arts and other schools around the country and saw that there was increased graduation rates, increased attendance rates, increased test scores, all the positives we want to see in these schools around the country where students are able to play with technology. And this person with the Yankees hat on and the people around them certainly look like they're having a lot of fun. And it's a different visual than what we're used to seeing when we think about school, but I think it's ground we need to push on when we think about what schooling should look like in the digital age. This is work that means a lot to me, and that is this idea of teaching young people about the media. And I think that not just because students are producers of the media, but they are also consumers of the media. By that I mean they're reading the media and reacting to these images that you see. And I argue that if students aren't taught how to read these images in their classrooms, that could be a matter of life and death. And I mean that quite literally. We have young girls that are starving themselves because they're concerned about their body image. We have young boys that are involved in acts of violence because they think that's what it means to be masculine, to be a man. And a lot of that comes from these images that you see in front of you that our young people are confronted by the millions in their formative years. So this book you see in the middle is a book that I wrote with some teachers about how we could teach students to be critical of the media, what we were calling a critical media pedagogy, and how that would help them not only in school but help them in their lives to have a better relationship and a more empowering relationship to the media. So we ask these kinds of questions. And if it's too fast to write this down, you want to email me or tweet me your address, I can send you this slide. But these are some of the questions that we're asking with young people when they read a media, a piece of the media, whether it's a commercial, a film, a TV show, a billboard. What does it mean to be normal, or what does it mean to be cool? What does it mean to have power? What does it mean to be desired? Who is not cool, right? How are you targeted as an audience? Remember, the kind of commercials they show on Nickelodeon are different than the commercials they show at the Super Bowl, which are different than the commercials they might show in the afternoon for a sitcom, right? And you're being targeted as an audience, and I think that's important to understand. What are advertisers thinking about you in that particular moment? So we help our young people to be able to operationalize these questions, and we're able to do that, like I said, across the K-12 spectrum. Second, third graders understand how they're being advertised to by the media when we finish these units, as well as the junior high and high school students. This is an example of a kind of image that your students are looking at maybe right now, or when they go home on their cell phones or their tablets or their laptop computers, or during commercials when they're watching something on television, or just in the magazines they read. And so we break these down. We'll ask, what does it mean if you look at the image on the left here with Hayden Panettiere, what does it mean to be a young woman, right, according to this image, right? And so the students will be able to respond. They'll look at the words on this image. We'll teach them how to read the image, read the words, and then read the visuals. You have pretty, sexy, amazing, it's a guy, your body, right? These are the kinds of words that are being kind of pushed out to our 12 and 13-year-old girls who are readers of 17 magazines. And then the image, right? And you see her face, which is totally wordless, right? And the eyes, the makeup, the smile, the big earrings, the uncovered bosom, right? So we talk about this with our students, and nothing does it say in this image about being intellectual, being smart, being strong, standing up for your community, right? It's all about being an object of desire. And the image of 50 Cent is equally problematic, in a gendered way around boys. It's about being tough, mean. He's got no shirt on, even though the man is a gazillionaire, and he can afford a shirt, but it's about his body, this sweaty body, this big gun, and this I can kill you look is what's being advertised to our young boys. Again, our 11, 12, 13-year-old boys who are thinking, this is what I have to do if I want to be respected. So we help them to unpack these images, which they see, again, by the thousands on a daily basis, and by the millions if you add up over the course of their formative years from K-12. So how do you help them to break that down? How do you help them to understand that they can remove themselves from these ideas behind the advertising, and that they have the power in the media age to create their own sorts of artifacts? And that's work that we're doing. It's been very powerful. The kids are extremely into it. I think it serves a social and civic purpose as well as an academic purpose. We've been having students create digital literary magazines, and this is a plug for NCTE. There's a competition for digital literary magazines. And we found that since we're able to create magazines now in the digital age, a lot more schools are doing it because it's cheaper for them to do and to distribute. Okay. Now I'll jump on to some examples from social studies and science and math. One of the first examples I want to share is I started this in a school where the students were struggling in terms of literacy achievement, but this became one of the biggest turnaround schools in the state over the years that I was connected to it. And one of the things that the school did was it created an autoethnography project where we went cross-discipline, and the kids spent a number of weeks thinking about myself, who am I, in the social emotional learning sense, through poetry, through narrative writing, through scripts, and that was mostly in the English part of the discipline. My community, which was journalistic, case study, interviews, observation, what's going on in my neighborhood, which was more connected to the social studies, and then my world, right? How do these issues that are kind of connecting with my own community, neighborhood, myself, connecting to the larger world, and that was done through math. And we put together these autoethnographies that were interdisciplinary, and the teachers worked together, and the students did amazingly, and they came out of this with a much better sense of kind of who they were and how they connected to their society and how they connected to the larger world. This started much earlier in a project that I did around a day in my life, where I'd have students write about a day in their lives. And this first project was done in East Los Angeles, and it was very successful. And so the students ended up going from just writing about a day in their life to using digital cameras and collecting images around the day in their life, to creating these documentaries that went along with their essays about a day in their life, to reading a sociological and historical text that connected how they were experiencing a day in their life to how other people in the past have experienced their own lives. And so it became this connection between them exploring their own world and really getting into these ideas of history and sociology. That evolved into what became a project known as Young Critical Minds, and these young people ended up creating their own blogs and traveling around the country and really becoming social advocates and talking about issues in their community that really mattered to them. But it all really began and stemmed out of them beginning to write about their own lives. This is a project that we're doing now in middle schools and high schools here in Harlem, where young people are creating original historical projects around their neighborhoods, and they're scanning some of the materials that they're collecting. They're turning them into digital archives. The digital archival material that the young people are collecting is actually becoming a part of a larger archive here at Columbia University and at the New York Public Library. And so we bring these kids, and they'll come to the university, and they'll talk with professional historians, archivists, community members, and they are excavating history from their own neighborhood. And they're learning about history in a very different tactile way. They're doing history. They're actually becoming historians. I talked earlier about learning is kind of who you become, but they're becoming historians. And we're seeing it's having an impact on their writing, it's having an impact on their reading, how they think about school, and it's having an impact on their academic achievement. It's also having a larger impact on the community as we're collecting this larger history of the neighborhood. And I've seen people around the country, and as I've given this talk, starting these programs where young people are collecting the history of their own neighborhoods and communities as part of history class. We're also having young people interview their elders and interview folks in the community. This is a great way to connect young people to elders in the community. It's a great way to connect the elders in the community to the school, and just to create that bridge of cultural transmission. And I argue that oral history is a really powerful way for young people to connect to history and for young people to be producers in the digital age. And so we've had these oral histories. Students will collect them through like digital videotaping and digital archiving, but they'll also turn these oral history interviews into documentaries. So we have students who will make documentaries based on the interviews that they're conducting with people in the neighborhood and community, and then sharing these documentaries with folks in the neighborhood. One that we did was around issues of migration and transmigration. And so students were interviewing folks in their communities and families who had migrated to the United States, and then they kind of turned these interviews into a really powerful documentary. We also have students doing research in their neighborhoods and communities and becoming social scientists, and we start with these key questions. If you could change the world, what's one thing you would do? If you could change your community, what's one thing you would change? We create this process that starts with identifying a problem, moves to designing a study, collecting data, and then creating products and disseminating products and taking action. And a lot of the products that the students are creating around their research are digital products. Again, they're creating PowerPoint, documentaries, blogs, websites, and we have tons of this information to share. If you want to email me, I can send you some links to the work that the students are doing. If you want to share them with your students. Just a couple weeks ago, we brought students from all over New York together to share their projects, and so they're connecting online and disseminating this research they're doing in their own neighborhoods and communities across digital platforms, which I think is just absolutely amazing. This is another example of technologically mediated research. So the students are not just doing research kind of out in the communities, they're looking at digital archives, they're doing internet-based research, they're looking at library work, and so these are students that we actually brought into the university. These are high school kids, but they're doing research here at the university, but they're using the laptops as portals, and now universities and public libraries have so much information that's available digitally that you can actually have students collecting this information, from the comfort of their own homes or their schools or classrooms. I talked a little bit about creating digital documentaries already. So in the math and the sciences, we're also doing a lot. So I've already connected to a few examples where we're doing work in the math and sciences, but I thought I would share a few others before opening up the questions. One of the things that we've been looking at is since math is such a huge predictor of success, and many students have low academic self-confidence around their math ability, we were trying to figure out where is this math located in popular culture. So we find shows like Sports Science, which is on ESPN, looking at magazines where young people are reading about sports, and really connecting this idea of sports and mathematics and youth culture, and that's been very productive for us as we think about ways to connect students to experiencing math and doing math in the digital age. This was an example of a documentary that students made. This is an elementary student, obviously. They researched budget cuts in their school and in their state, and they at the end of this research, where they learned a lot about how budgets work, a lot about mathematics, and they were asking questions that were more important to them, like why are teachers getting fired, why don't we have enough books, why doesn't our school have enough resources? But in asking those questions, they really came to a complicated mathematical understanding of how budgets work in the state. And this was a school that was in danger of being taken over by the state, and now it outperforms the state average, and that happened in a period of less than 5 years. One of the things that happened there is that the students began to take these questions they were asking and using them to gain a knowledge of mathematics. This is an example from a high school where we were doing similar things with the students, and they were interested in the dropout rate in schools across their state, and so we helped them to figure out how to develop research projects to understand why certain students weren't doing well in school. And so they were able to create surveys, they were able to look at dropout rates and grade distribution and exam scores, staffing data, student demographic data. They were also able to connect these various data to census data and looking at issues of poverty and joblessness and how that was affecting schools. This is a project that I ran in Los Angeles, and some of the lowest performing schools in the state of California. But over the 12 years that we ran this project, we had 100% graduation rate and 100% college acceptance rate with the students that were involved in this program. And one of the things that we learned in preliminary research was that the students' mathematical reasoning was really turning around as they were becoming these digital researchers, asking questions that really matter to them. This is an example of a slide that they made, but this is them looking at how demographics were changing in the city. They took the census data and they geoplotted it through the Geographic Information System software. So they created these maps showing how the change in the ethnic composition from 1960 to 2000 in the city, and they were looking at what that meant in terms of joblessness and poverty and distribution of resources and all these other kinds of things. The last couple examples I'll share have to do with technology and science. One is a colleague of mine, Chris Emden, and if you don't know him, you should really look him up. You can see his name on there. It's E-M-D-I-N. He has what's called the Science Genius Project, and so he's got students here in the city of New York engaged in hip-hop battles around science. And here's a picture of one of the battles. There are students all over the city of New York, and what they were invited to do was to participate in a competition to see who could develop the best hip-hop songs around a complex science concept. And the judges were professional scientists from Columbia and hip-hop artists from New York City. So they brought them here into our Callan Center, which is our biggest auditorium on campus, holds nearly 1,000 people. And every day they came and it was packed. Students from all over the city, they're developing these projects and writing these hip-hop songs. So you can see behind the young man is, you know, on the slide, there's joules, kinetic energy, all these complex scientific concepts, but he's connecting it together through hip-hop. And this project is already transforming the way students are thinking about and doing science, not only in the city, but around the country. Right? Connecting principles of science to a technology in music that the students are connected to is increasing their interest, it's increasing their enthusiasm, not just about their music, but about science and scientific concepts. This is another example of having students connecting their interest in environmental issues and community gardens to literacy and to digital literacy. And this is an example from a middle school where the kids are kind of learning about their environment through science. They're writing about what they're learning about the environment through English and using their digital literacies to distribute this information through online blogs and platforms where they're advocating for more environmental awareness in their community. The last example I'll share is Scratch. And this is a free website where we've been working with kids. I don't know if many of you have used it before, but if you haven't, you should try it out. You can sign up for an account. It'll take you 5 minutes. Scratch.mit.edu. It helps you figure out how to make video games. You can make digital stories. The kids can make artwork. It's appropriate for elementary age kids all the way up to high school kids. The complexity is really determined by how much you put into it. But we have had a variety of projects where we're allowing the kids to use the Scratch platform to make video games and art about issues that matter to them, but they're learning about computer programming, they're learning about digital literacy, and they're learning about traditional literacy as well. And this has been something that's extremely powerful for us, and I imagine it would be for you too. And you can get the students on it. Like I said, it's free. You go to the website, scratch.mit.edu. And this is an example of what some of those video games kind of look like. And if you walk through it, you see it's a very simple platform, but it also kind of saves your steps when you learn about computer programming as you put the video game together. And you can see how other people put their programs together. So if you like a video game, you can look and it'll show you the code that that person used, and you can use some of the code in your own video game. So I want to end. This is a slide of my mom and dad. It has 1967 to present because that's how long both of them have been teachers. You know, my mom and dad are 95 years collectively teaching, and my wife and I are approaching 50 years collectively teaching. And I like to end by saying that technology doesn't change why we teach. It may change how we teach. But the reasons why we teach are unchanging, right? Our love for kids, our desire to have them live more powerful and able lives because of the tools that they are equipped with in school. I know that education changed my life. I obviously would not be here giving this webinar if I didn't have excellent teachers and my parents who were teachers. And so I think sometimes there's a concern, those of us who are not digital natives, and I include myself in that group. You know, I started school in 1976 when we had no computers. The first computer I bought, I was already out of college and a teacher. So this isn't native to me either. And so this idea of coming to digital technology has been an important voyage, but it hasn't changed why I teach. It's just changed the tools that I use. And so when I think about this idea of digital technologies and increasing student engagement, why we teach still matters. Our passion for kids, our passion for our profession, our passion for what education can do, unchanging. And this is just about changing the tools. And I think that that's an easier way to swallow what may seem daunting for those of us that are kind of taking ourselves back to school so we can remain socially, culturally, and technologically relevant for our own students. And with that, I just would like to thank you for being a part of this webinar, and thank McGraw again for having me. Thanking you for all that you do as teachers for our students, and then I'll open up in the chat for questions.
Thanks, Ernest. If you have any questions, go ahead and type those in now into the questions box, and we'll get to them. We have just a couple questions so far. The first one is, what if we don't have great technology access at our school? What would you suggest there, Ernest?
Okay, so that's what I was, a lot of the schools that don't have the great technology are moving to the kind of the bring your own device, one-to-one. I do think, though, in terms of budgets, as now schools are thinking about, their budgets for the upcoming years, the devices are much, much cheaper. When I started, there were no tablets, and a laptop was going to cost you about $1,500, even in the 90s, which was astronomical. But now these tablets are, $199. You can get, you can get a half dozen tablets in your classroom for $1,000. So I think that the prices are really coming down. And I would also, the schools that I work with that are even the highly impoverished schools will have these kind of traveling computer libraries of the netbooks, and so teachers are able to do that. A lot of the projects we did, we're sending students to the library to work on the computers there. So I guess in the short term, I would say you can be creative about the devices you have and the devices that students have. In the medium term, I think that just even if a department got together and decided we're going to use $1,000, $2,000 of our department budget, we can get some pretty economical tablets. And even if between two classes you were able to have 10 tablets that you could use half the time for $2,000, I think that's a worthwhile expense.
Great, thank you. So we have another question here from Jill. Do you have any ideas for using technology in physical education classes?
Yeah, so I think that this whole idea around connecting technology and physiology, the sports science, ESPN, my oldest son is 13, and he's fully into science and sports, and so I think there's a lot of connection there. I was an athlete and a coach. We use technology a great deal in sports, and looking at videos and breaking it down and understanding kind of the physics and physiology of sports, but then also connecting it to ideas in physical education. So there's a part of physical education I think that is about fitness, and there's a part of physical education that I think is about physiology. And so certainly when you're thinking about that latter, there's a lot of ways that you can use technology. The folks here who are my colleagues who are in our program in physiology and education are using technology all the time, how the body works, images from sports, and having folks understand the difference, the kind of different techniques that are the vogue in different kinds of sports. And so if you've got students that are learning a new sport and you've got videotape, you're kind of watching it and breaking it down with them and using the technology, and they're going out and trying to do the same things on the playground. So as a coach, and I've been a coach for over 20 years, the technology is a huge part of how I connect with my athletes.
So we got another question here, came in from Wilma, and she's asking, what if the technology we have is purposely being ignored for the drill and kill test prep model? So I think she's looking for some suggestions maybe to bring some ideas forward on how to use what they have in place.
Oh, that's a great question. Unfortunately, it's a great question. I do think that there is some tension. between, as you say, the drill and kill and these amazingly powerful ways that young people are learning and engaging. The first thing I think that I try to do in the schools where I work is show how the connection to these kinds of digital technologies is going to get you much more bang for your buck in terms of changing students' attitudes and perceptions of themselves and changing achievement. That's the real issue. How are students best prepared for not only tests, but for life, for higher education? As someone who's worked in higher education now for almost 2 decades, it's the critical thinking, it's the creativity, and I think we just have to do a better job of selling that. The reason that folks do well on tests and folks do well in school academically is normally because they have a confidence in their skill set. It's not because they've been drilled. And I just think we have to continue to say that over and over again. I've been optimistic because I've seen it actually make a change in schools where I worked, where I said we're not going to see results if we stick with this drill and kill. What we really need to do is change mindsets and change attitudes, to have students producing tactile things that matter. Critical thinking is probably the most important skill in the 21st century. It's very hard to develop critical thinking through a drill and kill methodology. So I think that those are the kinds of things that we're going to have to do to make the case. There are lots of materials out there that can help you make the case, but I'd say, ally with your professional organization, ally with teachers in your department, teachers at your grade level, and just work hard to make that case locally to your school, with your principal, to your superintendent, the parents, whoever will listen.
Awesome, thanks for that. We've got several other questions in, so we'll try to get to as many as possible. Got one here from Ava. How would you use technology with teaching English language learners?
Well, I mean, that's how I started, actually, with the technology. In 1992, the very first unit I did when I was getting my credential was on English language learners. I worked at a newcomer school, which was all immigrants. And the first thing that I realized was they watch a lot of TV, and they're learning English through their interaction with this technology. And so we began to employ it right away, and having students kind of consume that technology and understand kind of popular English and use that as a bridge to academic English. We also began right away with having students use their voice. And they were much more confident about their ability to say things and to write things. We had them writing their own plays, acting out plays, filming screenplays. Many of the schools where I work, particularly on the West Coast, are 60, 70, 75% English language learners. So a lot of these technologies that allow for the connection between kind of oral fluency and academic writing are very, very powerful.
Great. So we got a question from Vanessa here. She says, I teach special education, and she loved all your examples and how they support teaching inclusively. She's asking, have you seen success with students identified with learning disabilities?
Yes, I mean, I didn't talk a lot about the demographics of the schools, but many of the schools that I work with are like 40% IEPs. That means that the students have individualized education plans that have been identified as learning disabled. There's a lot. I mean, there's so many kind of softwares and curricula now that are kind of using technology for individualized learning. And McGraw knows a lot about that. So I found that is very helpful. The confidence factor is huge with the students, and finding ways to connect with how they kind of see themselves as students in the media age. The engagement part, the multimodality of it is also, I think, really powerful. The visual elements of digital technologies. I think there are some students who are more visual learners, more students who are oral learners through hearing, and not just students who learn through kind of reading something on the page. So this has definitely been something that we've used in our mainstream classes that are 35, 40% IEPs, but also in special education classes. And I definitely think that the individualized education software platforms that are out there that kind of meet students where they are is going to be very powerful for students in special education.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that one. Got one here from Joan. She is saying weak broadband to support school Wi-Fi usage is very expensive. So I think she's saying, it's expensive to implement broadband in her school that's working. Also, monitoring what students have access to on the internet is a problem at our school. What do you think? So maybe some suggestions on safety nets for kids while using the internet and the networks at school.
Those are great questions, and I think that that's kind of where we need to go. I don't know that I have a great answer yet, as much as identifying it as an issue. I've been working with a couple of schools here. The same as in, the anti-bullying movement now is kind of calling out bullying. This is not in cyberspace, but just, in your hallways is a major problem. So this idea of cyberbullying is something that schools are going to have to figure out how to get smart people to help them with. Not because it's any more dangerous than, bullying that's happening, but it's taking things that happen in physical space and moving them to cyberspace. This idea of helping students to be critical consumers of the media is very important. What media should you consume, what's appropriate. Talking with parents about how to monitor their kids at home, I think it's just as important as what happens in school. They spend 6 hours in school, 18 hours a day out of school, and the whole weekends in summer. So we have a program where there's an elementary school, and one of the students here, who's also a teacher, is working with the parents, right? So how do we monitor kids' engagement with the media outside of our classrooms is also very important. But inside of school, I do think that you want to be very strong and monitor. There are programs that you can put on the devices at the, that are connected to the school system that can monitor the websites that are on. You can be very explicit as a teacher, and if you've only got 8 or 10 tablets around the classroom, you can have conversations and set norms and guidelines for which websites the kids can be on and how they can use those. But I do think that it's going to take schools creating those policies and sharing those policies and not being afraid of it. But you're exactly right that the media age, it creates new challenges and new problems that we're going to need to deal with, and partly because there's so much access to information, and there's access to a lot of bad information via the internet, and we have to protect our kids while helping them to be able to have access to the good information.
Awesome, great answer. Thanks for addressing that one too. I've got another one from Samantha. She's looking for some suggestions for technology to bridge between school and home. So some connection there between school and home using technology and devices.
Well, I have several kids that are in school. I mean, one of the things I think that's really cool is like for parents to figure out the cheapest devices to be able to get applications, so the apps, and especially free apps that are related to technology content. The teachers are constantly sending us these examples of free apps that you can download. I think that some of the simple kind of 1990s technologies, like getting parents' email addresses and being able to email them and share with them that way, is a simple way to kind of bridge between school and home. But initially we were concerned that homes don't have these kinds of devices, but we found the overwhelming majority of homes have. Some tablets have smartphones where they can download apps, and these are things that parents can do with their kids. Getting a Kindle account and getting some of the books that are free in the public domain, or books that are relatively inexpensive, and being able to read those with kids. Those are all ways that we're trying to make those kinds of connections. And simple things like having a some kind of online space. Getting the schools to help create that, where parents can log in and see what their kids are doing. The classrooms have websites, and those things seem to work really nicely.
Thank you. Final question here from what we've gotten so far. If anyone else has anything, please feel free to type it in. Tony was asking for, and I don't know if you have this, and maybe it's something we can follow up with them in our follow-up email, but a couple people have been asking, and Tony submitted this one, but for a comprehensive list of apps, websites, etc., that you've used and find easy to use and easy to implement in the classroom. So I don't know if the NCTE website has anything, and we certainly have apps and resources on our website, but is there a site you'd recommend or that we could follow up with people afterwards?
If I did, it'd be dated as soon as I said it, but yeah, NCTE has that. if you tweet and you go to EdChat, like hashtag EdChat, EDCHAT, and ask that question, before I got out of my office, you'd have 100 responses. And I think that's probably the best. I could share, you know, a few with McGraw, and they could follow up with some of the apps, particularly around science and the classics and that sort of thing with, that I think are absolutely amazing and that my students like. But there's a lot of collective wisdom out there with especially in social media. EdChat and then EngChat, ENGCHAT hashtag. If you put anything out there, you will get a lot of responses from really, really smart folks.
Absolutely, great suggestion. I'm just checking here. It looks like that's about everything we've gotten here. As far as questions go, we're right about at time.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for, it looks like people stuck around, so thank you so much for sticking around. Thank you for caring about this issue. Thanks to McGraw-Hill for caring a lot about this issue. To Doug and Jenna and everyone for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Ernest. And a couple people have been asking if we're going to share the slides, and we are recording this session, and we'll be sending that out in a follow-up email with the recording link, and then our email address if they have any questions. If we didn't get to your question, we'll follow up with you separately, but I think we answered just about all the questions. So thanks everyone so much for attending. Congrats on your school year and enjoy your summer. And we're getting lots of thank yous in the questions area. So thank you everybody. And have a good evening and have a great weekend.
Thank you.